What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 70 of the Club and Sub podcast. This week, we're going to break down UFC 268, Covington versus Usman, the rematch. Great fight, great card. I'm pumped for it. As usual, we're brought to you guys by betonline.ag. For a 50% bonus up to your first $1,000 deposit, use the promo code CLUBSUB. And guys, please drop a like and subscribe if you can. Tonight, you got me, John, at MMA Fox, and Luke at SWR_betting. The other two guys can't make it tonight, so we will be your guides going through this stacked UFC 268 card. So, without further ado, let's get into it. First fight of the night, we got CJ Vergara, Ode Osborne. Luke, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, interesting spot. More so just lean on the side of violence. I think it's an okay spot potentially for Ode, but we still have those massive concerns on him in terms of an extended fight, kind of largely a killer be killed front runner-esque type of guy. So there's always concern, especially, when there's a minus number next to their name, what your confidence interval is that they can win a decision. We've seen Vergara actually come on later in fights to boot. So I do think that is important to note, but I think Osborne has hand speed, size, athletic advantages. I do think he's the bigger hitter here, despite Vergara never being finished with strikes before. He has been dinged on multiple occasions. He did get dropped early in the Silva fight as well, I think actually twice, but did show some recoverability there. But nonetheless, fighting at the UFC level, that stuff catches up to you at some point. So I do think Ode in general is the better striker. He's obviously a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, has shown competency off of his back. One of Vergara's losses, he did just get ran on the ground. However, we haven't seen a ton of offensive wrestling from Osborne too, which needs to be noted. So I don't think you can necessarily assume that, he's going to come out here and shoot 6 to 7 takedowns, pass, and do that thing. He very well maybe could. We just haven't seen a ton of it from him historically. So definitely not counting out Vergara in the spot. I think he's live to KO, potentially live to take over later. But I do favor Osborne.
Yeah, I like Osborne a good bit. I actually, I laid the minus 160. I think there's probably value on him all the way up to minus 185 personally. I guess my view is just this is by far Osborne's softest test in the UFC to date. I get the angle on Vergara. He's going to keep coming forward. He's going to pressure, but we're in the big cage one, so I don't think it'll be as easy. And I don't think he pressures effectively, to be honest. And he's so easy to hit. And so it's unless Osborne gasses out, which I guess is in play, it's really hard for me to imagine him losing minutes to this guy. Vergara was a plus 200 dog to Bruno Correa, who's been in the UFC in the past that is not very good. And now he's taking on Osborne, who, to be honest, Osborne got knocked out in his last fight, and I bet Cap in that fight. I actually thought he looked pretty good before the knockout. And if he can hang with Cap standing, I just, short of a KO, it's just very, very hard for me to see a coherent path to Vergara winning this fight. Osborne's probably the better grappler. I'm pretty confident he's the better striker. He's the bigger guy here. And it's probably his easiest fight he's had since he was on Contender Series. So, yeah, I like Osborne a good amount here. I really think, if he's UFC level, and I sort of think he is, I think he should take care of business here fairly easily. So 2 units on Osborne, minus 160. Moving on, we got another fun one here. We got Melzik Baghdasaryan. He's taking on Bruno Karate Souza coming over from LFA. What are your thoughts, Luke?
I think it's a smash spot for Baghdasaryan personally. Definitely not willing to lay, minus 300, minus 310, just because the one extended fight we kind of have from a sample of him was his Contender Series fight where he did slow down pretty significantly halfway through. So there are still some questions on his gas tank there. We do still have some general questions on his defensive grappling too, if he's ever to be flattened on the mat. I do think his takedown defense is pretty good, and some of the transitions he was put in on CS, he did a really good job of nullifying hooks when there was a potential back transition there. So clearly the guy's got some sort of competency there defensively, but once again, I still have some questions if he does get flattened. So you put both of those things into the soup, definitely can't lay the price. But I think he's very, very live for a KO in this spot. Souza had never been officially KO'd, but are you getting feedback?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay, cool. Officially never been KO'd, but he also did get hurt and dropped in his last fight. He's also been dinged multiple times, kind of fights out of that karate-like stance. fights with his hands down, primarily uses, just footwork to try to evade strikes. And in playing that karate game, I think he plays it okay for like a regional MMA level. But man, I have some big concerns when he's fighting a potent UFC level striker, which Bogdasarian, in my eyes, 100% is. The guy's aggressive. He throws heat, goes forward, pretty diverse in what he throws too. He's obviously got nasty kicks to the body, goes to the head. So I just think he has a lot of general advantages here on the feet. And despite Souza actually being a black belt in jiu-jitsu, he doesn't really wrestle. In fact, he's the one usually struggling with the wrestling. So I just don't really see a submission being very high percentage unless, he comes out here and looks like Jordan Burroughs, or he locks up like some shitty ninja choke against the cage or something like that. So I just think his win equity is kind of small here in terms of winning minutes. I think it's pretty much for him to win this fight. I think it's pretty much relying on him catching Bogdasarian with something, but he's still not a big hitter overall. I think he only has 2 pro KOs out of his 10 Ws, or Bogdasarian just like gassing and him maybe being able to take over in 2 and 3. But even if, like, hypothetically Bogdasarian slows down in the second round, even in that Contender Series fight, he was chucking heat. He was still coming forward. I would still put him into like the effective gasser category if he truly does have a gas tank issue. He's still going to do things. He's still going to be aggressive. His shots still take an impact. So I just haven't seen really anything to suggest that Souza is a UFC caliber fighter. Not to mention that he's coming in on very short notice for this fight too. So there's a good chance, his gas tank might not be particularly great either. I know he went a hard 25 back in LFA, but nonetheless, short notice for a guy who's going to come forward and chuck heat at him. I like Bogdasarian by KO at like plus 150. I think it was one of the easiest bets for me to make on the card.
Yeah, I was somewhat interested in fading Bogdasarian when the Laramie booking happened with Laramie, just because obviously, there's a huge grappling question there. But you touched on it. I mean, Bruno Souza is a terrible grappler, legitimately awful. I don't really think he's much of a threat here to grapple. And I think you nailed it with the effective gasser thing. I honestly, and look, maybe I'm wrong about this. If I had seen Melsick go a hard 15 in the UFC, I would probably lay the wood here, to be completely honest with you. I don't even think he's necessarily has a gas issue so much as it's a load management or energy management issue, because he throws everything into every shot, but he still comes forward even when he's tired down the stretch. And that's something, he's only got 7 fights. As he gets older and more experience, he's probably going to be able to dial back a good bit. But yeah, I mean, I just don't. I'm not going to lay the price, but I don't really see many coherent, win conditions for Souza in this fight. He's going to try to outfight him, and maybe it turns out Bogdasarian can't cut off the cage enough, but I really would be pretty surprised at that. On top of which, I kind of think, it pains me to say, but as like we saw with Sandhagen and like Jan last weekend, Sandhagen was going to need it. He did outland him, but he was going to need to outland him by a massive amount to offset the power coming back. And I kind of think that's the case here. Like maybe Souza could outland him over 15, 75 to like 50 or 75 to 60, but like I still don't think it's going to really matter just because there's such a huge gap in power between the two of them. I don't think Souza's UFC level, to be honest. I'm actually, it's funny because I bet Conwela Kirk at like minus 250 against him in LFA. I still can't really wrap my head around what happened there or why Kirk didn't wrestle in that fight. But I remember taping him and I was like, oh, this guy has no chance to ever make it here. I'm shocked that he has made it this far, which, credit to him for fighting intelligently. But Melsick should have him very well covered. Like, I kind of think his win condition is probably Melsick gassing out. Like that's really it. I can't see him winning, 10 minutes of that point-based style against Melsick. I like the KO line as well. Look, I mean, if somebody wants to lay the chalk with him, I honestly don't even blame them. I'm kind of come down with you where it's like, I want to see the gas tank be a little bit more reliable before I do that. But yeah, I mean, Melsick should roll here. Moving on, we got Dustin Jacoby. He's taking on John Allen. This was originally supposed to be Alexa Kammer against John Allen, and it's kind of funny because I saw a bunch of people saying they would have bet Allen against Kammer, and I really don't see it when I tape John Allen, to be honest. The guy is he got a win as a big dog against Mike Rodriguez where he landed 4 takedowns. But other than those takedowns, he didn't do much that fight. We didn't really see him do anything really effectively against Deleeds when he fought him. If anything, Deleeds was winning the stand-up for most of that fight till he slowed down. I just don't – I appreciate Allen's willingness to grapple, but I think he's a C- grappler. I just don't think he's very good at it. I don't think he's a very good striker. I don't think he's a very good athlete. Could he win by just existing in Jacoby's face? I suppose that's possible. But if Cutelaba wasn't able to get him down and finish him on the mat, or wasn't able to finish him on the mat, I really don't think that Allen's going to be able to. And I just think there's a massive gap in the levels of striking here. So I'm not betting it because minus 400, it is a big number, but I really don't think there's any value on Allen here unless maybe Jacoby wasn't training and he gasses out fast, but I think he should have him pretty well covered. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid spot for him. Once again, the only potential concern is that it's super short notice if he's in shape or not, but I was kind of peeping some interviews and some IG stuff, and it looks like the guy's been in the gym and training. Unlike the Cutelaba fight, I guess when he took that one on super short notice, where he did get a little bit tired too, but I guess he was in Mexico 7 days before that fight, just boozing and partying and stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, yeah, hindsight 2020, all things considered, that's a little bit more understandable for that performance. But you kind of hit it. I think the levels on the feet here are pretty gigantic. I just don't see, even if Alon does get him down, I think he would have to get pretty close to 10 minutes of top time in this fight, because I think he's pretty screwed on the feet, to be honest. I think Jacoby largely manages distance pretty well. I know he's been hurt quite a few times, but also fighting a really big guy in Maxime Grishin, who's fought all the way up at heavyweight. We know Cutelaba comes forward, throws heat. Where, even the guys like Alon's KOing on the Brazilian regionals, it's just kind of yeah, whatever. I just think him clipping
Brazilian
Jacoby.
regionals.
Yeah. It is what it is. Yeah, so I just think him clipping Jacoby's lower percentage. I don't see him winning a range kickboxing match with Jacoby in really any scenario, to be completely honest. So I think that win condition of Alon is just so small. I think he's pretty much has to be entrenched on wrestling a lot, and then Jacoby maybe gassing because of the wrestling and then squeaking a split or something. But I think his gas is going to be fine here. I think it's a levels fight. Yeah, I think it's a good spot for him.
Even in the wrestling too, right? He couldn't hold down Mike Rodriguez much. Which I think speaks volumes about what's going to happen here, So yeah, I honestly, I never advocate to lay chalk parlays ever, but if you wanted to use Dustin Jacoby at minus 350 or 400 in a parlay, I honestly could not hate on you for it, to be completely honest. But moving on, I'm going to stay with you here, Luke. We got Chris Barnett taking on John Volante. This is the people's main event. Volante in his backyard in MSG. What are your thoughts here?
I'm just going to pass it over to you because I know you have a much stronger take on this one. It was a pass for me. I didn't do a ton of in-depth into this one. It's just I really want my money nowhere near either guy personally. But I understand the angle of why you're taking it 100%. So campfire time for John on John.
Yeah, I love Volante here, to be completely honest with you. I bet him at plus 116, but I honestly think even at minus 130 where it is right now, it's still bettable, to be completely honest. It's funny because it's I get it. Everybody wants to fade John Volante. He's looked very large since he moved to heavyweight, but man, his career would really just have to be completely gone to lose to Chris Barnett. Barnett was plus 400 against Rothwell, and he looked plus 800 in that fight. I'd favor Rothwell against Volante in a heavyweight fight, but I wouldn't have him more than minus 150, minus 185. This is by far the worst opponent that Volante's facing in his entire career. Even in terms of I know Volante traditionally a light heavyweight, but he's much bigger than Barnett too. Barnett's 5'9", Volante's 6'3", so he's got a big size edge. The Collier fights age shockingly well. There's no danger of Chris Barnett coming out here and putting out the kind of volume that Jay Collier put out against Volante. And if he's not going to do that, or he can't do that, it means we're talking about a technical kickboxing match on the feet. where I think Volante is just the superior fighter in every way. And on the other side of it, if Volante really wants to, he can probably just take him down and wreck him on the mat, to be completely honest. And even like one step further, if we were to look at the cardio here, Barnett's got no cardio at all. Volante is slowed down in the Green fight where he was clearly out of shape. But he came in, I think he came in near 240 in his last fight when he fought Collier. And his cardio looked a bit better in that fight. He in general looked a bit better. And I guess that's something worth keeping an eye on as like weigh-ins come and seeing like what he looks like, what he weighs in at. But ultimately, I really struggle to see where Barnett has sustained success in this fight. Volante is a UFC vet who's had like 15 fights in the UFC and is pretty much a 500 UFC fighter. Chris Barnett's a guy who was fighting 0-0 guys 3 fights ago and going to split decisions with guys with under 5 fights on the regional scene. I don't really see it in any way. Look, I know Volante's retiring. Maybe he's been taking time off, but like I saw some pictures of him training grappling in the gym, and he actually looks like he's in decent shape right now, at least comparatively to where we were with pregnant Volante against Maurice Green a couple fights ago. So I don't know. I know it's gross to bet John Volante, but I'm just like I don't really see where Barnett wins this fight. The bottom line is Volante may be a mediocre UFC fighter, but mediocre UFC fighters beat the shit out of, mid-tier regional fighters, which in my opinion is what Chris Barnett is. So I like Volante here a lot. Moving on though, Luke, going to fire it back over to you here. We got Jordan Williams taking on Ian Gary. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I shouldn't say interesting fight. I think it's largely a pretty good spot for Gary. I'm not going to lie. I think the line's getting a little out of hand though. The kid looks to be a pretty, serviceable, regional level fighter, at least as of right now. He seems to be reasonably well-rounded, but at least in like taping the fight. And one thing I think is interesting and just watching all the different guys that Gary's fought, nobody really's ever like gotten after him per se. Like he's kind of been given tepid, range-based kickboxing matches on the feet. And in that type of like scenario and archetype for where his skill set is, he's done very, very well. Even in his last fight against Jack Grant, who's probably the best guy that he's fought, who's, kind of been around that Cage Warrior scene for a while. He pretty much just stood in the middle of the center of the cage and Gary just pot shotted him and just danced around him the whole time. Whereas like, we know how Jordan Williams fights. He's going to come forward. He's going to chuck a lot of strikes. He's going to get in your face. So I just think there could be some general merit of like Jordan Williams just making in this like a greasy, gritty, grindy type fight. And maybe we just don't really know how, Gary would react in those situations. Maybe he handles it completely fine. But the real downside for Williams for me was the Gall fight. Clearly, I think Gall's definitely made some improvements with his hands. I thought his boxing looked better than it ever had in that fight for the limited time that we saw. But the reality is Mickey Gall still isn't like some great striker. He's a jiu-jitsu guy at the end of the day. And he fractured Homeboy's face in 6 different places. He broke his nose in 3 different spots, broke both of his orbitals. This was only like 3 or 4 months ago too. I'm kind of surprised he's coming back this soon, to be completely honest. Then he jumped on his back and choked him out. But traditionally, Williams, comes from that wrestling background. He is tough to just take down and wrestle overall too. So I don't know. I like I said, I think he could kind of be a sneaky live dog, at least in relation to the price tag of it getting a little bit up there. But I'm more so on the side that this Gary kid seems to be reasonably good and well-rounded, but Irish MMA, meh. He is down at Sanford now, though, I think. So,
yeah, he is, which is encouraging.
Yeah, which is a good move. So, yeah, definitely a pass for me, but I can't really get beyond like minus 300 for Gary.
So I have a small bet on Williams here, and like, I don't know. It's weird, right? Because I do agree with most of your assessment on Gary. Like he does seem to be, very technical kickboxer. He seems to have a nice choke game, a good jiu-jitsu game. Like I see why people like him and think he's got promise. But it's just like, you look at the guys he's fought, and he has really fought nobody who could even present, a challenge to him to date. You look at the best fight he's beaten is probably Jack Grant, and Jack Grant is like not even almost UFC caliber, unless you want to say Rostam Akman because he fought in the UFC. But Rostam Akman should have never been in the UFC either, So it's like he's really fighting like nothing but bums. And so on the one hand, it's like I see why people like Ian Gary, as a fighter, he does a lot of things that look nice. And it may translate, if he ends up being a pretty good UFC fighter, it really wouldn't shock me at all. But, on the other side of Williams, I'd be big on him here if it wasn't for the Gall fight, to be honest. That really kind of sticks with me, especially because, and I hate going the narrative route, but it's like the guy, we know he's a diabetic, and that's why he was fighting at 185. He drops to 170, and then the first time Mickey Gall touches him, he dies pretty much, and then he was basically, I don't hold most of that fight against him because you could see he was pretty much on jello legs the rest of the round after Gall hurt him early. It's just the fact that Gall hurt him that easily. Like, I watched the dude go to war with Ramzan Kurmagomedov, who's a very good prospect, trade bombs in the pocket with Gregory Rodriguez and look fine, fight Nasruddin Imavov for 15 minutes and look fine and not really get close to being, finished on the feet. And then Mickey fucking Gall touches you once and you die. That is concerning. It's a small sample, so I can't say, he's chinny at 170, but it is a big concern. But just going back to, Williams' record, I was pretty high on Williams coming into the UFC. I think I bet him against Imavov. You touched on it. He comes from a wrestling background. He's seemed, before the Gall fight where he was hurt again, he seems to have pretty good defensive jiu-jitsu, I was shocked by that fight. But, you look at who the guys fought. He went to a split with Kurmagomedov, who nobody knows about yet, but he's going to be in the UFC in due time. He's a really, really promising young prospect. Beats Gregory Rodriguez, takes a round off Nasruddin Imavov before gassing out in a fight where he got headbutted twice and kicked in the nuts in that fight. And then, the Gall fight.
Hurt Imavov too in the first round.
Yeah. And he looked really good early in that fight. And so it's just like Gregory Rodriguez might be a top 15, top 20, 185er, Imavov probably up there as well. And he's out there having competitive fights with these guys. And now he's plus 300 against, Ian Gary. Like, I see the technique angle on Gary, but it's like, I've seen Williams compete with really good fighters and have competitive minutes with them. Whereas I haven't seen Gary fight anybody but a bum yet, So it's like, I took plus 280 just because I'm like, I can't reasonably put Gary past like 65% until I see him, win minutes against someone who's actually going to punch him back. And, kind of to what you said earlier, Williams he is the kind of guy who is not going to sit back and give you a tepid fight. He will bite the mouthpiece, go forward and get in your face. And so I think he's going to test Gary in a number of areas where Gary hasn't been tested before. I'd favor Gary here. He's probably going to win, but we see this all the time when these kids come up here and take huge steps up, under 10 fights, and they fight a guy who's just been fighting at a different level and they lose. So we'll see what happens. I like Williams, though. I think he's worth a poke. Like I said, with the Gall fight, I'm staying small just because that makes me really, really nervous. But I don't think you can back Gary here. It's Williams or pass. Moving on, Luke, do you have a bet here? We got Shabazian taking down Nasruddin Imavov.
I do not. I was considering betting Edmund. This is like one of the later fights I got to, and kind of I pretty much taped it the afternoon, and then like the market came in on him, and I think the line moved like 30 to 25 cents. I probably would have played Edmund around that plus 115, plus 120. But at current price, I guess I'm not really that interested. We've obviously been a bit lower on Edmund on this pod than most. We all cashed on Mr. Brunson at plus 300. Thank you, Blonde Brunson. That's going to be one of my favorite cashes of all time. Love that one. But I think this fight's interesting, though, because with how he's gassing historically, it's come from heavy wrestling-based game plans from, whether that was him actually initiating the wrestling against Aaron Stewart, where he got tired in, or it was against, Jack Hermanson, who he knows a pretty good wrestler, grappler archetype. Derek Brunson, collegiate wrestler, black belt. Those are the fights he's really slowing down in, where we haven't really seen him, I guess, extended at range when that component really isn't there. And that's not to say Imavov like never wrestles, because he has on occasion, but not really. He's more, once again, of your range striker. So I largely think it's going to be, a range kickboxing match where if Edmund doesn't have to try to stuff, 7 or 8 takedowns, I'm a bit more optimistic for his gas tank. And I personally think he is the better striker in this fight, who is more dangerous. So I am picking him to win, but I still have a lot of the same issues I've had with him from the jump, which makes him difficult to back. And Imavov's actually kind of outperformed my personal expectations for him. So right now it's a pass for me, but I think Edmund does get back in the win column and is a step back down from, which needs to be noted.
Yeah, so I was pretty much right there with you. I was going to play Edmund. It was plus 130, and it seemed like the price was continuing to move toward Imavov. So I was just like, all right, I'll wait. And then out of nowhere, it crashed down to about evens. And so now I'm sitting here like, all right, well, I would play him at plus 125, I think. But, it's weird because we obviously did fade Edmund against Brunson, but like you look at these fights, you look at the fights where Edmund has gassed out in. Darren Stewart fight, he attempts like 12 or 13 takedowns, just no energy control at all. Brunson fight, not only does Brunson try to grapple him, but Edmund comes out throwing like 110% into every shot to start that fight. And you could see he just blew his load trying to get Brunson out of there early. And to be honest, I can't even like hold that too much against Edmund, just because he was a young kid who was knocking out everybody in under 3 minutes. And, that's generally what happens to those kind of fights. And then the Hermanson fight, I honestly thought he looked pretty good for a large portion of that fight. He obviously won the first round. The second round was close. Hermanson's got one of the best top games in the sport, and he managed to scramble up a couple times. You could actually make a reasonable case for him for that fight being a draw. It's just that, once Hermanson started pushing the grappling, you could see Edmund's energy just couldn't hold up with it. But like, I still do think, no, I don't think Edmund's a future champ or anything like that. But, he is a good boxer. He can box. He's a decent offensive grappler. He hits really, really hard. It's kind of crazy to me that he went from being like minus 160 against Brad Tavares to minus 300 against Eric Brunson to now we're at even money with Nasruddin Imavov. And like, to be clear, I'm kind of warming to Imavov. Obviously, he's a pretty good striker. He's very sharp, keeps a very high pace, which, you love to see. But again, he beat Heinisch last fight, and it was super impressive that he finished him. But like, man, like Heinisch isn't very good. And you only go back one fight. And, we just talked about Jordan Williams, who's plus 300 to Ian Gary. And Imavov did not look like a favorite against Jordan Williams in that fight early in the fight until Williams gassed out, And so I'm watching tape on it. I'm just like, is Imavov going to out jab Edmund while they're fresh? Like, I really don't think so. Imavov tends to fight with his hands down. Edmund's a pretty sharp striker offensively. I expect Edmund to have some early success here. I do tend to think also that, the grappling upside is probably more in Edmund's upside than it is on Imavov's here. Now, if I were Edmund, I would not come out here and wrestle because we know he can't control his energy. But, I look at the fight and I don't know, man. I like Imavov, but like as a fighter, but it's a pretty big step up in terms of like, fighting another technical fighter who's on that level. And I am not totally convinced if they stand for 15 that Edmund's necessarily going to gas out. It could be a tepid, low volume kickboxing match, in which case I sort of favor Edmund to win that fight. He has the grappling upside. The one issue with Edmund is just, the cardio has been fairly predictable to this point. And if you're giving Imavov an 80% chance to win, round 3 or 70% chance to win round 3, it's extremely difficult to lay an even money price with Edmund here. But I do think Edmund's going to have a lot of success early in this fight. I think he's got a very strong chance to knock Imavov out early in this fight, to be honest. Imavov does fight with his hands down, and Edmund does hit very hard. But ultimately, I think I'm passing. I guess I would put it right around evens, to be honest. So plus 125, plus 130, it gets back there. I'll take the shot. But I do kind of think the market is, or it was at any rate, when he was a dog, disrespecting Edmund. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited for that fight, though. Moving on, we got Phil Hawes taking on Chris Curtis. What are your thoughts here, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's largely a pretty decent spot. Now that we're running through all these guys, there's a lot of people that have cardio concerns on this card. It seems like that's a talking point on all these guys. But yeah, we know Hawes can gas out. Curtis, pretty solid record, but his strength of competition is pretty low. He's kind of like the hero of the regional scene, I'd say. I'd say he's like an elite level regional fighter is probably the best way to classify him. Unfortunately for him, he drew a couple tough guys in PFL and Mago and Cooper, who we saw just fight for the title a couple weeks back. So no real shame in those losses, all things considered. But I do think Hawes is the better striker here. Curtis just doesn't move his head a whole lot. He's only been knocked out, I think, like once, but I will continue to say it till the cows come home. I mean, Phil Hawes hits like a fucking truck and is a crazy athlete. I think he's very live for a KO. Curtis's like pace is also kind of like inconsistent. Like I wouldn't say he's like high volume either. I think he's kind of content to like walk guys down, but like doesn't like do a whole lot either. At the same time, like I said, strength of competition isn't great. Hawes is probably the best wrestler that he's ever fought, maybe outside of like a Mago or whatever, where he was taken down, multiple times. I think Cooper actually had maybe some early success in that fight too, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's not as if we haven't seen Curtis not be wrestled before. So once again, think it's a decent spot for Hawes. Am I trying to lay -3 or something on him? No.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on pretty much everything there. It's kind of sad, like when Curtis got knocked out by Cooper, it's like he had just lost to Mago, I think, like earlier in that night, thinks he's going home, and then Mago can't fight. And they're like, oh, come on, you're just going to come fight Ray Cooper. Like, guy's not preparing for a fight there, and then just gets starched. But yeah, I mean, Curtis, you nailed it. He's kind of like your classic like AAA baseball player that absolutely crushes AAA, and every time he gets called up, he's just fucking awful. And he just goes back and forth like that. And like, that's kind of the story of his career. Every time he's fought somebody that's pretty good or decent, he loses. And I actually kind of like Phil Hawes as a fighter. He has the massive cardio concerns, but like if you had Hawes with decent cardio, he's probably a top 10 to 15 guy, right? At 85, if he could consistently fight for 15 and wasn't potentially chinny.
I was going to say, we probably should add that last part too. Yeah. He's been hurt quite a bit too. But
yeah, he gets hurt like every fight, which is obviously why, I couldn't I don't think I could lay it with Hawes. I don't think I could parlay it. But like, I do think he's a better wrestler than that. I honestly think he's probably on the same level as Karamov, maybe even better than him as a wrestler. And so, I mean, Hawes should dominate this fight as long as his gas tank holds up. Curtis was struggling with Kyle Stewart like a year ago in XMMA, I really, really don't think he's going to have much success against Phil Hawes early in this fight. The Beer Yoda just posted doesn't go to decision. What's the line on that? That actually is kind of interesting.
I think it's chalky, isn't it?
It must be, right? Let's see. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Phil Hawes. -160.
That's actually not bad, to be completely honest.
I thought it was like 260.
Yeah. I mean, because Hawes has a chance to KO him early in the fight standing. And if Hawes does do Phil Hawes things and gasses out, there's a good chance he's going to get finished. I actually don't hate that, to be honest. But yeah, I think Phil Hawes takes care of business here relatively easily. I just don't think Curtis offers a whole lot to him. Moving on, I do know you have a bet here, Luke. We got Ally Kento taking on Bobby Green. What are your thoughts?
I'm doing it again with the King. I've said it like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done doing it. But Bobby just ropes me back in every goddamn time. I think it's a pretty solid spot for Bobby Green. And I find myself saying that often, and it just doesn't always pan out that way. But the reality is we all know that Bobby's a really solid boxer. He's extremely underrated, strong wrestler when he decides to go to it. His pace is consistent. His cardio is good. His defense is actually really good. I highly recommend people go out and check out his pre-fight interview he did with like MMA Junkie. Him sitting there just essentially burying the officiating. And I think he does bring up a lot of good points in his fights, that he blocks a ton of shots and he rolls with a ton of shots, but they're scored as if they're like debilitating shots when he's clearly being more effective in there. So I thought that was kind of interesting that Bobby's definitely acknowledged that too. But that's kind of been the issue with him. He's pretty much outpaced damn near every single person he's fought, but certain optical things, some bigger shots here and there, aren't really what's scoring him fights. But at the same time, in fighting Iaquinta, who's not like crazy high output either, who's like crazy hittable. I mean, got outlanded by Khabib at distance, like 100-40. You can say, all right, there's a threat of the wrestling there, which opened up the hands of Khabib. I get that to some capacity, but still, GOAT status or not, Khabib's not a good striker. So to get, 2.5x there is just not a very good look. Obviously coming off a long layoff, fought some elite guys, at least more recently too, but he's been getting hurt and dropped too, more so in his recent fights as well. I just kind of struggle to see him keeping up with Bobby here. And, Al's not immune to being out wrestled, granted by two good guys in Khabib and Kevin Lee. But we know that if Bobby decides to wrestle, I think Bobby can, wrestle up there with just about anyone. Probably obviously doesn't submit Al. I know Al's been submitting it earlier on in his career, but, just not really Bobby's MO. Nonetheless, I think it's a path for him to potentially win minutes should he decide to take it. I just kind of think Al's on a bit of a decline. He's always just kind of hung around this top range because he's been so inactive and, beat good guys here and there, and it's kind of kept him up there. But Bobby Green's been crazy active. I just, like I said, I struggle to see him keeping up with the pace of Bobby here. He throws more, he's better defensively, has a wrestling path. I played it uber small. I think I only threw like a unit on it at minus 165 just because I can't lose like another 2.5, 3 units or whatever, laying wood on Bobby or anything like that. But it's one of those spots. I just feel like he's kind of a must play, to be honest, even if it's small. I think he has a lot of stylistic advantages in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I'm hoping the line bounces back down to like minus 150. Like, I wouldn't mind grabbing him there. The last time I laid juice on Bobby was the Moises fight, where I went huge on him, and it was painful, especially since when you tape this fight, it's so obvious that he won that fight. It drives me fucking nuts. But yeah, I mean, look, the Al stuff, it's like, he's had like a weird career because he's beaten a couple, he's got to win over Jorge Masvidal. He's got to win against Kevin Lee. He's beaten good fighters, but it's almost like he's winning fights pretty much on grit rather than, being especially good at anything. The Cerrone fight in particular has aged really, really poorly because it's like Cerrone absolutely killed him and then promptly completely fell off like right after that fight pretty much. And I think that might have had something more to do with that, Cerrone is just on a different level than, Iaquinta is. And I kind of think that with Bobby, but like you just touched on it, it's like Bobby's style doesn't do well with the judges at all. And Al is the kind of guy who I could see getting dropped or getting wobbled like 2 or 3 times and somehow squeaking a decision. Like, you look at the Masvidal fight. He should not have won the Masvidal fight. But he did. He managed to squeak out a split there. And so that worries me. But in terms of like the actual fighting, I mean, look at the Cerrone fight, look at the Hooker fight. Anybody with a good rangefinder just tends to be able to keep him on the outside without too much issue. Like, he had no idea what to do to close distance against Hooker. Same deal with the Cerrone fight. As soon as he kind of figured it out, he just started picking him apart. I do kind of think something that could be interesting is maybe a live angle on Green, because Bobby can start slow at times too, while he's trying to make reads and whatnot. Because I think once he settles into the fight and starts letting that jab go, he's going to touch him up pretty easily here. But, Al could maybe give him some issues in the first round. The problem for me is I just don't see how, Al doesn't have like almost any not almost any, but he does not have much finishing upside here. And Bobby's just a superior striker to him, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't know. I might lay the fucking price of Bobby Green. I mean, the guy just had like a very competitive fight with Rafael Fiziev. Is he really going to lose a kickboxing match to Al Iaquinta? Like, I don't think so.
What I will say, if he loses this one, you got me?
You're good. Yeah.
I was going to say, if he loses this one, I am now officially done betting Bobby Green.
It's just, honestly, it's like one of the better stylistic matchups that Bobby's had outside of like, wrestlers who can't strike. But But I thought that about the Moises fight too. So I don't know. It's like I'm going around in circles in my head over the same 2 points over and over again. Bobby should kick his ass. Bobby's also going to make sure he's in a close fight. No, it's just back and forth over and over. And I can't decide which side I'm going to come down on. But like, they fought similar level of competition. Bobby's got much better metrics than he does. He looks much better on tape. He's a much better boxer in what's likely to be a boxing-based fight. It's hard for me to not have Bobby like 65, 70% here, to be honest. But with that said, I still haven't quite decided what I want to do with it. Moving on, we have the feature prelim. We have the Greek god of cardio death, Andreas Michailidis, taking on Alex Pereira, defeater of Israel Adesanya in kickboxing. And I love Michailidis here, to be honest. I know that is like a crazy, crazy take, but Alex Pereira has 4 MMA fights, only one in the last 5 years. Whatever you think about Michailidis, he's got 17 fights. He's actually got a fairly well-rounded game. Like, I wouldn't rate his striking particularly highly, but it's not like god awful either. And as a grappler, he actually has a decent single leg. He's got a black belt. When he's gotten on top of guys, he's actually looked pretty good doing it. He's looked pretty good in the UFC. Like, no, he didn't finish KB Bueller, but he won that fight without any issue at all. And then even the fight before it against Bukowskis, he was pretty clearly winning the fight before the cage door KO'd him. Fucking ridiculous. But, I just look, Pereira could maybe light him up and knock him out. That's in play. But having watched Pereira's MMA fights, it's fucking ugly, man. You watch, I know 3 of them were his first 3 were like 5 years ago, but they looked absolutely awful. He got held down in pretty much every one of those fights and needed either an official stand-up or got tapped in the first one of them. Even in his last fight in LFA, he doesn't do a great job of like using the cage. He gets backed up pretty easily. It turns out the guy he fought in LFA is a complete bum. That guy had no chance to take him down. And that's kind of like the other thing for me here is like Michailidis would probably be minus 500 to minus 1,000 against every single guy Pereira's fought in his career to date, and deservedly so. And yet we're here with Pereira being lined close to minus 300, which makes zero sense to me. We've seen Pereira look bad on the mat and not know how to get up. We have seen him gas out horribly. We saw him against a Tony basically get punched in the face over and over and over again after he gassed out. So it's like, normally with Michailidis, my big fear is he's just going to gas, but I don't think Pereira's got fucking cardio either, And so it's like Pereira could just nuke him out. Yeah, obviously he's a very good striker. But if he doesn't, it's going to get ugly. And if Michailidis does what he needs to do, and I have to imagine going against a world-class kickboxer, he's going to know not to just fucking stand and bang with him. But if he does what he needs to do and just dives at legs, it's like there's a chance that Michailidis is like hindsight like 70% here, which I know sounds crazy. But if it turns out he can just take him down with ease, he may just honestly insta-tap him on the mat. I know Glover was like, oh, he's not that bad on the ground or whatever. But it's like, what else is he going to say? He's training with him. He's not, he fucking sucks, Like, what the fuck else is he going to say about him? I'm just like, and I know for a fact, it's like, the guy had a kickboxing match 2 months ago. He's clearly not training MMA full time. For all of 2020, pretty much gyms in Connecticut were closed down where they train. So I'm sure he's made improvements since, he fought in 2016. But I haven't seen them yet. I know he basically has the same weakness as Michailidis with slowing down. And one of them has potentially massive grappling upside, whereas the other one needs this to be a kickboxing match to win it. So I guess what I'm getting to here is like, yes, if it turns out Pereira's made all of those improvements and can keep the fight standing, he may deserve to be minus 300. On the other side, if he hasn't, you could very well have Michailidis looking at minus 300 here. And so I kind of have it capped as even. Obviously, there's a lot of huge level of variance with this fight, depending on the improvements Pereira's made. But I don't think we have any reason to think that he's going to be able to compete in the grappling, to be honest. And so, yeah, I'm on Michailidis pretty big here at about plus 200. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a dog or pass, at least from a money line perspective, for all the reasons you brought up. I don't know how anybody could lay, minus 230 here, even though I'm more so of the opinion that he probably comes out here and smokes Michailidis at the same time too. And I guess in that scenario, then yeah, sure, he covers his price tag. But to your point, there could be some sneaky grappling upside on him too, but there's just a lot of questions on it. And I don't I don't love Michaelatus's wrestling either, so I don't necessarily think if he like insta just shoots, he's going to naturally get takedowns there too. But to strengthen your argument too, we did see a similar archetype when Giga Chikadze came into the Contender Series and fought Austin Springer. I think he was like minus 350 in that spot, and it just turned out he couldn't stuff takedowns and he couldn't defensively grapple at that point, and he got taken down and got submitted. So I really wouldn't be shocked, I guess, if that was the case. I don't know. I don't really love what I've seen from Michaelatus in terms of the wrestling. And for me to take the stab, I guess I'd rather just look to live bet it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean that's fair, but like honestly, Chikadze and like Adesanya are like interesting. Obviously, very comparable fighters to him. You know, obviously Pereira, 2-weight class champion in Glory, but like for me, there's like one big difference between those guys and him, and that I think he could get to that level, right, if he had enough time put in. But like Adesanya had 10 MMA fights before he went to the UFC. Chikadze had 9 MMA fights before he went to the UFC. And like in Giga's case, you know, he's training at Kings, which has tons of bodies for him to work with all the time, right? You know, Pereira, it's like, what's his name? Kyle Malgalesh, Glover, and that's it. And, you know, Glover, and he's still kickboxing full-time, and Glover has his own things going on. Yeah, if he had like 8 to 10 fights, I'd be much more reserved about it. But 4 MMA fights, it's a different sport. You know, obviously striking is striking. I mean, what's your view on him long term? Like, are you bullish?
I mean, I remember watching him back in Glory in the days too, when I was big into kickboxing when they still had it on Fight Pass. I personally think he's a better kickboxer than Giga. To be honest, you know, once again, how that all translates into the soup and how it goes into MMA, we'll see. I mean, it really all comes down to what he's able to do in terms of his takedown defense, defensive grappling, you know, that type of thing. But I think the guy is fucking legit as a striker, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's fair. Moving on, Luke, I'll start with you here. We got Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler. What are your thoughts here?
I went like all over the board on this one, like pre-tape. I actually thought I was going to take the shot on Chandler, and then I got closer to it. I watched a couple of the fights, and I was like, probably just betting, you know, general fight violence. That's how I'm going to go about it, even though I still think that's a viable way to play it. And then after I got through everything, I think it's a great spot for Justin Gaethje, and it's actually my biggest bet of the card. I got 3.8 units on it at minus 200. Chandler's interesting because, like, traditionally, you know, there aren't many guys who I'd say it's like, oh, you're drawing Chandler, you know, it's a good matchup or whatever for you. But I think it's a really good one for Gaethje in the spot where, you know, Michael Chandler, big explosive dude, but he's pretty much reliant on, you know, that big left hook, the overhand right, and then just kind of swarming guys, getting them out early. But if you look at any of his fights that he's really had extended, he's not really pushing any consistent pace. He fights in bursts, kind of takes minutes and points off. He's pretty hittable to boot. So in any sort of extended affair here where Gaethje's output is much more consistent, it's much more proven against better fighters too and better strikers, I would say I just don't really see Chandler winning minutes in this fight unless he's able to significantly hurt Gaethje, like get multiple knockdowns or something like that. In that case, he probably just finishes the fight anyway. I don't really see an overt wrestling path for him. I know he's a very good wrestler, but Gaethje's takedown defense is pretty elite. You know, what we saw in the mat against Khabib didn't look great, but it's also Khabib, so I don't know how much there is to take away from that. And I think Justin's also improved defensively, at least some. I think he's kind of harnessed his offensive tools a little bit better. And even those times he was KO'd by Poirier and Alvarez, they were kind of like more of attritional based KOs where, you know, kind of as touched on, that's not really the style that Chandler works on the feet anyway. And usually if he's winning extended fights, it's coming via wrestling and, you know, being base BJJ guys like Brett Primus and Goiti Yamauchi and stuff like that. So, yeah, and we've seen Chandler get hurt multiple times too. We know Justin hits incredibly hard, probably one of the best phone booth fighters we've seen in the history of the UFC. I think he's like 75% in this spot. I put a Chandler KO, maybe like 20%. Personally, like I said, I just don't really see much merit to him winning minutes. You know, maybe he can catch Gaethje. Like I said, it wouldn't be shocking for me. It's just not as I think high percentage is other people think. Once again, just my opinion, but I like Justin to put him out in either 1 or 2.
Yeah, so I don't have like a bet here, at least not yet anyway. But I kind of was in the same mindset. I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to bet Chandler because, the lasting impression from Gaethje was what he looked like on the mat against Khabib, and his submission grappling looked tragically awful on the mat. But, and so in my head, I'm like, yeah, Chandler one takedown could be the fight. And I guess to an extent, I still think that could be the case. But then it's like just contextualize like Chandler's career, especially his recent career. He doesn't wrestle very much anymore. I think partially because he has pretty bad cardio. And so when he does, he tends to slow down. On top of which, it's like Gaethje has very good takedown defense. You kind of touched on it. And so it's like even if he does try to proactively wrestle with Gaethje, I don't think it's a lock he gets him down. And so with that dynamic, it's like, well, I don't expect Chandler to attempt 4 to 8 takedowns here. I think it's more likely that maybe he attempts 1 or 2, and sure, maybe he gets him down and subs him. But again, even Chandler's grappling style doesn't. I think he's a black belt, but he's not really a proactive sub seeker. He's generally a guy who's like pretty happy to like sit in your guard and hold you there. And so the chances of sub aren't nearly as high as like I initially thought they were, I don't think. On top of which, I think once it gets past the first, if he takes Gaethje down in round 2 or 3, I'd be shocked, legitimately shocked. I think once it clears the first round, the takedown threat of Chandler is pretty low. And if it comes to them swinging, with most fights, we talk about it all the time, but I'm like, 2 guys are going to swing on the feet. It's often going to be somewhere close to 50-50, except in this case, we have one guy they both are big hitters, but one is stupid durable and one is remarkably fragile. And so if they do just decide to stand and bang, it's like I favor Gaethje like 70 to 75% to be the one who finds the KO. I also just think in general, Gaethje's boxing is a lot sharper than it is than Chandler's is. So, even if they are swinging, I think Gaethje's going to be the more accurate striker in those exchanges. And I also think Gaethje doesn't, he does a lot more attritional work than Chandler does. I think he works through. I wouldn't say Gaethje has good cardio. I don't think he does, but I think he works through slowing down better than Chandler does. And, yeah. And so it's so hard for me to see. I see a path for Chandler. It's just, I don't think it's a large one, to be honest. And so he either needs to get him down very early and submit him, which I don't think is likely, or put him out. And again, I think it's much more likely that Gaethje puts him out. And on top of that, when you look at the Khabib fight, as bad as it looked, Gaethje was totally gassed out at 3.5 minutes into the fight and I don't know if that was just the pressure of Khabib combined with the heat or whatnot, but that's just the reality. It's much, much harder, obviously, to defend someone with an elite top game when you have no energy left in the tank. And that's not what we're probably going to be talking about here. So, I think Gaethje's in that 70 to 75% range. I'm debating whether I should lay the chalk on it. I do think there's a case for it, to be honest, though. It's just, he's just a better fighter, Chandler, I don't even think, had Chandler not put Hooker out, I am not sure he ends up winning that fight. And I bet Chandler there, to be honest. So, yeah, I think a bet on Gaethje is not bad here. I'm kind of hoping we'll get some late Chandler money and maybe that line dips below -200. I'm seeing right now, it looks like Bet Online's taking some money on Chandler and it's down to -204. Like if it goes below -200, I'm going to take the stab, I think, just because one guy has been fighting world-class fighters in the UFC. One guy is been in Bellator and hasn't looked that great since he got to the UFC. So yeah, I like Gaethje here. Moving on, though, we got Shane Burgos taking on Billy Quarantillo. This is a fucking banger. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's a reasonably decent spot for Shane if he can stay conscious. Just because at this point now, I think it's fair to say there's some serious durability concerns with him now. At one point, I wasn't necessarily in that camp, but I think he's been knocked down 4 or 5 times in the UFC now to boot. So I think that's fair. But what I will say in his defense, the guys he's getting knocked down by are like all top 15 guys who have been perennial big hitters, which needs to be noted for sure. I guess they're similar in the sense they're both aggressive. They throw a shitload of strikes and are poor defensively. But I think the main difference between the two is Shane is just the much better technical striker, actually by a significant margin, in my opinion. I think he's probably one of the best guys in the UFC at digging the body. His hand speed is definitely different. And I just don't think Billy Q's like the biggest hitter in the world. Personally, I think he just more so relies on like output and grit, where despite like Shane being high output too, there's just so much more technique and like process to what he's doing, at least offensively, than what I've seen from Billy. So, I mean, I guess if it goes a full 15, I guess you can make a case that this fight's reasonably close. I don't know, man. I think the bigger shots are going to come from Burgos. I think he's going to hurt him at least at multiple points in this fight, maybe put him out. Obviously, a big path for Billy Q historically is, on the ground being a black belt, but Shane's retardedly difficult to take down. He stuffs takedowns at like 89%. The only guy to really have any wrestling success on him was our boy Makwan in the first round. Outside of that, anybody who's ever taken him down, he's popped up pretty much right away. And we've even seen when Billy Q gets on top of people, he's lost position before, most notably the Spike Carlisle fight. So it's not like he's crazy great from top position always either. So I'm thinking of laying it with Shane, but I want a better number personally. I'm just more so of the opinion it's kind of a levels fight in some capacity, but just the style dynamic, I could see it playing moderately closer. So I'm fine with passing it too, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a levels fight. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, Shane would be a pretty significant favorite over every fighter that Billy Q has fought in the UFC, like no question about it. It's funny. I think Billy Q's power a bit more credence after the last couple of fights. In particular, he was hurting Benitez pretty much every time he let his hands go, which was shocking to me, to be honest. But I like the under here, to be completely honest, because like on the feet, these guys are both stupid high output. Shane, even though I think Shane has good defensive tools, he still fights with his hands down like crazy. Billy's, I mean, you saw how easy Tucker was able to hit Billy. And I think Shane's a better boxer than Tucker is by a good margin and a much bigger hitter than Tucker is. And so I think they're going to throw a ton of punches on the feet while they're standing. And even in the grappling, like, you mentioned Billy's a black belt, but like, and so I think he has some chance, I guess, to submit Shane, but I actually kind of think Burgos could submit him. I think Burgos is a pretty good grappler, to be honest. Like if they get into a bunch of grappling transitions and it turns out Burgos can just badly out grapple him, I won't really be shocked at that. But either way, like I think, you're talking about two guys who are fairly opportunistic grappling wise. So you're going to have guys looking for finishes on the mat, and on the feet, they're just going to throw nonstop. Like under 2.5 at plus money just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And like, I know Shane hasn't always been like a super big finisher, but also like look at the guys he's been fighting. This is really an enormous step down from the competition he's been fighting for the last 3 years. And so I think his chances to finish are much higher than they've been in past fights. And on the other side, you touched on it. We're at the point with Shane where I was always like, Shane's lucky his chin is so good. He's able to survive it. But now it's like when Emmett dropped him 3 times, Barboza dropped him. And the way I'm probably the 100th person to say this week, but the way he went down against Barboza was so fucking concerning and weird. At some point, he's just not going to be able to take the shots he was taking. And maybe we're getting there. And even if we aren't, we know he's going to get punched in the face a lot if they're standing. So, look, I like Burgos here. I think he should be the better fighter wherever this goes. He should be much better on the feet. I think he can handle himself on the ground just fine. Like, I don't think Billy's as dangerous on the mat as like Amir Khani, and Amir Khani really couldn't get him into too many, finishing positions in that fight. So like, I can't blame somebody for laying the wood with Shane. I'm not personally, just because I do have the concerns about, what is going on with Shane's durability, but I love the under here, to be honest. I'm going to be honored. I think plus 115 is a really solid number. Moving on though, we have the fight that everybody's here for. Not Zhang and Rose, not Usman and Covington. We got Frankie Edgar maybe making his final fight back in New York. Place is going to be electric, and it is a fucking absurdity that he is an underdog in this fight. This is fucking crazy, man. If this fight was made 3 years ago, he would be minus 350 against Marlon Vera. I am not even fucking kidding. And go, if you want to tapo cap it quick, go look at Frankie Edgar's Tapology page. This is the worst opponent he has fought in literally 10 years. And he's a fucking underdog. I mean, did anybody watch Vera's fight with Davey Grant? Like, I know he won the fight, but the guy got dominated on the mat in that fight for most of round 2 until Grant gassed out. He's been held down by Noeline Hernandez, not in the UFC anymore. Willie G. Buren, not in the UFC anymore. Andre Ewell held Marlon Vera on the fucking mat. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And now it's like, I'm hearing people say, oh, well, Frankie's not really a controlled grappler. It's like, what Frankie Edgar are you talking about? Like, actually look at the guys he's been fighting recently. There's a reason he hasn't been getting as many takedowns. You look at Munoz. Munoz is almost impossible to take down. Edgar got him down twice, and impossible to hold down. Max Holloway is one of the best defensive grapplers ever. He was never going to try to take Brian Ortega down, and the zombie fight was like over before it started. So I don't think any of that is predictive. To be honest, if you want to look at probably the closest example to this fight, is probably the Yair Rodriguez fight. Except the difference is Yair Rodriguez is actually really good, and Marlon Vera is a guy who, look, I'm not going to say he's not good, but he relies on physical intangibles to be good. I don't think he does anything particularly great at MMA. I actually even think striking, I kind of favor Edgar on the feet a bit. He's probably not going to get stuck on the fence like a lot of the guys Vera has fought. He's faster than Vera is. He plays the inside-out game very well, and you see it whenever guys don't stand in front of Vera. He has trouble hitting back. And on top of it, look, he is – God, I got to settle down. But all I'm saying, Frankie Edgar attempts 7 takedowns for 15 minutes for his career. A takedown is probably going to be around here. I honestly think he's going to fucking smash Vera from top position. I know he hasn't done it in a long time, but he still attempts takedowns, and I really think if he gets his hands locked, Vera's going for a ride and he's not getting back up. Look, there are concerns about Frankie's age. I'm not going to say that they're not, but let's actually contextualize when he's been finished. It was a flying knee by Corey Sandhagen. KZ, who was one of the bigger hitters at featherweight, and then the Ortega fight where he got wobbled by an elbow and then clipped by the uppercut. It's like, yeah, he's been finished more recently, but no one's putting him out soft. He went 5 hard rounds with Munoz, who I think is a much bigger hitter than Vera is, and held up under the power fine. I mean, for Edgar to be an underdog in this spot, the wheels have to have completely fallen off. It makes absolutely no sense with me. I don't understand how anybody could bet Marlon Vera as a fucking favorite in this spot. It is fucking insane. I think, I have Edgar like 65%, and only that because, look, he is old and he's 40, but this is a perfect stylistic matchup for him. The line makes absolutely no sense to me. I am balls deep on Edgar money line. I am balls deep on Edgar by decision only. It's fucking crazy. War Frankie, he is going to absolutely ruin this dude. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it all there for me too. But I guess just to add a couple more points in there to boot, if you go look back at pretty much everyone Vera's fought, over a pretty long sample size town too, the guy's been in the UFC for fucking ever. Even in the fights he's winning, he's never significantly outpacing anybody. like I think you kind of summed it up best, that he more so gets by on just like general aggression and willingness to throw. He's got decent kicks but yeah, there's just, I don't think there's much overall process to his general stand-up. And to your point, Frankie isn't necessarily the most high output guy in the world, but he plays that inside outside game really well. And I just don't think Vera's really going to be able to cut him off in those capacities and kind of just get those opportunities to butcher him per se. It's not out of the question. To be honest, I'd actually be more concerned with like a Vera head kick than I would for him to be, or I should say to knock him out with punches per se. But to your point, the ground, to me, it's pretty much one-way traffic. We've seen Vera get held down on the mat before. It's pretty easy to say that Frankie's the best wrestler grappler archetype that he's fought in the UFC. There's no reason why Frankie shouldn't be able to land at least a couple takedowns in this fight. And in theory, if he's able to do that, get off on that game, and our assessment is correct, that also limits the primary, narrative of the fight of Vera knocking him out, because Frankie is perceivably fragile at this point now too. So, yeah, I will use the John euphemism that Frankie as a dog makes no fucking sense. I even classified it as a must bet. I'm definitely not as exposed to Frankie as you are in this spot, but I played him at plus 145. If he dies, he dies. But if he doesn't, it's one of those spots like he has hindsight favorite upside. And if he wasn't 40 years old with potential durability concerns, I'd have Frankie capped pretty comfortably as a decent sized favorite. So I'm willing to lay it. I've made peace with if he gets knocked out. Just stylistically for the line, it doesn't make some sense.
No, and Narco mentioned it in the chat that you could hedge it with a Vera round 3. My only thing with that is like Frankie's got elite cardio. It's not like he is not a guy who's going to slow down here, right? That's just he never has in his career. We just saw him go 5 rounds. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't really think Vera's hands are that dangerous. Yeah, a head kick or a knee or something stupid like that does scare me a little bit, but this makes no sense at all. I think he's going to completely dominate this fight. We'll see. But I think Frankie's going to go out there at 30-27 him and probably retire after.
And then one more quick point, too, that I think is kind of floating under the radar. Marlon Vera consistently has dropped first rounds, like I'd say like in 60 to 70% of his UFC fights. So hypothetically, I mean, we got a plus 140, plus 145, plus 150 on a guy who probably wins round 1 at a decent clip here, who has 25 minutes of gas in a 15-minute fight.
Dude, so I'm looking at that now.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Outside of when Vera's gotten round 1 finishes, I don't know if he's won a round 1 in the UFC, to be honest with you.
He dropped it to Buren. He dropped it to Kennedy.
Yep. Hernandez won the first round against him too. Ewell won the first round against him. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's fucking nuts, man. Like you're spotting Frankie Edgar, a guy who's not going to slow down around. Like that's wild. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Tajik Boyd does not agree with me at all here. He thinks I'm donating money to bookies, but I think Tajik's going to be pretty wrong about this one. We'll see though. I love Tajik. Great people. But moving on, I'm going to start with you here, Luke. Got a fun one. We got a rematch. We got Weili Zhang taking on Rose Namajunas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I bet Weili in the first fight. I think I had like 2 or 3 units on her. I don't think we really learned a whole lot of anything. So really my rationale is if I was willing to play Weili at like minus 185, why would I not play her at evens here? So it's kind of one of those bets I feel like I'm just obligated to make. And a big component of making the bet in the first matchup is that we've seen Rose struggle late under general pressure. We've seen her struggle with leg kicks. And I just think there's more overall merit to Weili the later that this fight goes. Not to mention that Weili's shown to be a potent finisher historically. Obviously, Rose isn't going out there and getting cold clocked every 2 seconds. I concede that 100%. But I think Weili's actually a decent archetype to kind of get in her face, make it dirty, greasy, because I do think Rose is probably like the better technical striker and just like a pretty based fight. But, we saw what Andrade was really able to do in those scenarios too in the latter rounds of the second fight. I see something very similar here. Weili's shown she can go a hard 25 with Joanna. Her pace is pretty consistent over that as well. I think she's going to be the girl landing the bigger shots. I would favor Rose should the fight hit the floor. But Weili's takedown defense has largely been pretty good too for the most part. So I don't see an overt path there. Yeah. Plus 100 doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I guess that could look stupid hindsight if we see another Rose early finish, and maybe that, that just is what it is for the matchup. But win or lose, I want to see this one go 25 just for vindication of whether my read on the fight was right or not. Because I firmly believe if this fight hits the cards, Weili's 65, 70% in that scenario personally, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of annoyed. I should have hit it at plus 100. At this point, I'm probably just going to sit back and try to play it live. I don't really want to lay minus 120, especially because we know Rose is going to have a good first round. But I do agree with you. Like it's like if you bet Weili minus 200 or 180 or whatever in the first fight, how are you not betting her here, right? I mean, because unless it just turns out Wiley is uber head kickable, which I guess could be true, but that doesn't really tend to be a thing. Like what did we learn from that fight? She got head kicked a minute into the fight. That's it. It's literally, to me, a meaningless outcome. Yeah, I mean, my view on the fight's the same it was the first time around. I think Rose can be competitive and win rounds early in this fight. I struggle to see Rose winning rounds down the stretch. She's gassed out multiple times in her career. It's pretty reliable to happen at this point. Yeah, she won a decision against Joanna, but the big difference in that fight was, Joanna just doesn't hit hard. And, she was just basically losing on power optics. Whereas with Wiley, we know Wiley can throw the same output Joanna can. We literally have seen that. But, Wiley actually hits hard. So, I don't think Rose winning on power optics is at all reliable here. If anything, I think the volume of Wiley is just going to be very, very clear down the stretch here, and she's probably doesn't win rounds fairly easily the later this fight goes. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my view on the fight. It's like we've never seen Rose Namajunas land more than, I think, 100 significant strikes in a fight before. We've seen Wiley land 170 in a fight before. It's virtually impossible, unless you're saying in a women's strawweight 115-pound fight that Rose has 40% KO chance or 40% finish chance. I don't really get how she's, a favorite or evens here.
The over 4.5 is evens too.
Right. Well, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. And I do think Rose finishing early is live. Obviously, she does hit hard and she is dangerous early in fights. But I don't think, is it liver than 20%? I really would be surprised, to be honest. And I think I'm kind of with you. I think if it goes to a decision, Wiley is a decent sized favorite in a decision here. I do agree Rose is a better grappler, but Rose isn't much of a wrestler. So I don't really think, I think Joanna is a better wrestler than Rose is. And, Wiley held up okay in the clinch against Joanna. I'd be more concerned about the grappling if it was someone like Carla, who's actually a really good wrestler. But I kind of think it's just going to stand. They're going to stand for 25 minutes. And look, if it gets down to plus 100 again, I'll play Wiley. But otherwise, I mean, just wait. You can probably play it live after a round, if Rose has her typical front running success early in this fight. But yeah, I don't. If you liked Wiley the first time around at that number, I don't know how you don't like her here. It makes no sense to me. I feel like we learned nothing. Unlike the next fight, where I think we might have learned a lot the first time around. So with that, we'll go to the main event. We got Kamaru Usman taking on Colby Covington. What are you thinking about, Luke?
Actually, no side for me. I know it's a pretty polarizing fight. A lot of people are on Colby. I've seen some people lay it with Usman. I actually jumped in on the over 2.5 at minus 185 before they pushed it to 3.5. To me, I think the fact that they even set it at 2.5 is just a gigantic market overcorrection. To say that Usman hasn't shown more power components in recent years would not be true, or that his hands in general boxing hasn't improved would also not be true. Because it 100% has. However, it's not as if there's this long track record of Colby just going out there and getting dusted. And obviously referencing the first fight, with it going long and it was more attritional based damage. And then he eventually KO'd Colby. So I don't see an Usman finish, at least in that part of the fight, being any higher than maybe 10 to 15% personally, which might be a hot take, but it's, for me, they're largely wrestlers, decision machines primarily. I'm not sold that Usman has just completely changed this life-altering power, with hurting Gilbert Burns. Obviously, knocking out Masvidal was impressive. I can't take anything away from that. But also to assume that Colby is not going to make any adjustments going into the second fight, I think is just irresponsible too. He pretty much audibly said too, I was fighting like an idiot. I was just going strike for strike. I would assume that he's going to take at least some more defensive approaches here in this fight to boot. So my take is more so in relation to the total than actually a side. I think this fight goes over the halfway mark at a pretty sizable clip. I still think you can play the 3.5. I think that's around minus 130. I think that's a solid price. I wouldn't play it as heavy. But in terms of how I think about the actual matchup, I think there's a lot of things that Usman showed that he did well in that fight. In terms of his just general efficiency, I think he landed at like a 48% clip in comparison to Colby with 36. Also, I think a third of Usman's strikes were to the body, which we clearly saw that take in evidence over the course of the fight. And I think he landed those at like a 72% clip. Colby definitely slowed down a little bit. And obviously then there's just more power and optical components towards Usman's game too, in terms of landing the bigger shots. Colby definitely had his moments there, definitely landed some big shots of his own, was definitely competitive on the numbers. It was a competitive fight. I get it. So, you know, if gun to my head, if I was to play a side, I'd probably just take honestly a small little poke on Colby by decision at like plus 500 or something like that. But I know it's going to piss off a lot of people, and this is generally not how I look at fights, because I can still see it being a competitive, closer fight. And one guy's, you know, plus 2 something or whatever. Why not play that? I think it's just kind of a trap by the number spot. I think Usman still wins the fight at a sizable clip, probably 66, 70% of the time. Even if it is competitive, I just think it's kind of like the styles of how they fight is going to lead to it being, you know, moderately competitive, unless, you know, Usman goes out there and just blows him out of the water. So traditional logic, you know, plus 200, you'd play that. But I don't know. To me, I think it's kind of a trap by the number spot. I'd rather just go with the total.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's a complicated fight, to be honest, like to break down, because like look, we saw a competitive fight the first time they fought. I think there are things that Colby can do that would make a difference here. Like if he starts switching stances and kicking calves, like I'm still waiting to see what happens when someone actually kicks Usman in the legs. You know, he does have small legs, and we don't know how to react to it. No one's done it yet. I think it would be wise for him to do it. But like you touched on a lot of good stuff, and it's really in that iteration of the fight, Colby certainly did not look plus 240 in that fight. I also think the market is probably overblowing Usman's improvements. Like he's made improvements for sure, but I still think he's pretty defensively susceptible, and I don't think he's a great combination striker, to be completely honest. But it's so tough because I've seen people say Colby's going to try to wrestle this time, but like, I really don't. I think Colby trying to wrestle Usman would be a really, really, really large mistake. You know, we saw Colby lose the striking battle in the clinch to Rafael dos Anjos. If he ends up forcing this fight into the clinch, I think things are going to go haywire in a hurry, to be completely honest. I just don't really see a way that he outgrapples Usman here. I'm not sure Usman would outgrapple him severely, but I do think, you know, if you're going to play the clinch game with Kamaru Usman, you're making a massive mistake. And in terms of the kickboxing, it's like, it's so hard, right, to gauge how often does Usman win a decision, because we know he hits a lot harder. The power optics are going to favor Usman. We know that going in here. We also know he has a lot more finishing upside. But like, are they going to favor him to the extent that he's going to win a decision like 75% of the time? I don't think so. I don't really think I can go past like 60-40 with it. I do think, you know, this is maybe, it's funny because it's definitely not the most high level fight in MMA technique wise, but I think the way these guys are built and as such good round winners with such good cardio and such good durability, they're 2 of the best 5 pound for pound in the world. And so like, I'm still like not really sure what to think of it. Like I think it's going to be competitive in spots, but I also think that you touched on the body work. You know, we've never seen Colby slow in a fight before, and you could tell he was starting to hurt pretty badly after the 3rd round of that fight. Repeatable. I think for Colby to win this fight, he has to have big success early. I think to your point, he cannot get into, you know, a gunslinging match with Usman here, even if he can deal with the damage coming back at him, which it seems like he can. Colby seems pretty durable, but even if he can deal with it coming back at him, it's just like, you know, the power optics are going to be horrible for the judges. So it's like, for me, it's like one of these fights where I kind of think almost any time this goes 5 rounds, Colby's going to look like value, but I'm also not sure he actually is, if that makes any sense. Like, I think Usman could pretty consistently win close decisions just because of those power optics and because, you know, Usman could, in theory, I think, try to go to the wrestling, whereas I don't really think that path is available for Colby. But even with all that said, you know, I look at it and it's like, I really, really struggle to get past Usman, like 65%, maybe 70%. And so like I can't feel passionate about Usman at minus 300. Like I think he's gonna win the fight, but I can't play that. I'd probably play Colby. I actually sort of like the under, to be honest, just because, or the under, or not the under. The fight doesn't go the distance at about minus 110, just because I kind of think, we saw these guys throw about 500 strikes in their first fight, and they're going to probably throw that many in this if they go 25 minutes. At the end of the day, they're both 170 pounders, right? Either that many strikes being thrown, there should be a decent chance that it finishes, but I don't know if I'll play that either. I think it's a complicated fight because I think it's going to look close. And if you have a bet on Colby, you're going to feel pretty good about the bet. I'm just not sure that it's going to cash. I've toyed with playing Colby. I'm still toying with it. Like if he got out to plus 275, plus 300, I think I'd take the shot just because at that point, I feel pretty good about him winning the fight more than 1-4. But does he win it more than 1-3? I don't know. I wish I had a more firm take on the fight, but I don't even know how much of a handle I have on Usman striking. Like, I'm not trying to poo-poo what he's done recently, but the reality is Masvidal and Burns are career lightweights who he knocked out. It's not like, he went in there and he's knocking out these iron-jawed guys at 170 pounds. You have two guys who just recently started fighting up. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think it'll be entertaining for sure, but I can't really firmly, say that there's value anywhere here. So if it gets up to plus 300, I'd play Colby. I don't think I could lay minus 300 on Usman. It's not here. And I have laid minus 300 on Usman many times before, but this is not the spot to do it, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't mind fight doesn't go the distance, but I am not dying to play a side in this fight. Do you have anything to add, Luke? All right, Luke is frozen. So with that, so I will actually be at the fights this weekend, guys. I don't know if anybody in chat's going to be there. If so, I'm going with MMA Knockout Bets. That's Andrew Gambas on Twitter. Check it out. Him and I are going to be there. Say hi if you see us. I'll buy you a drink. It'll be fun. It's going to be a fun card. I'm pretty excited to go to it. Luke, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, no, it should be a fun. I guess last thing, I did just have like a hypothetical for you about Colby. If he does make adjustments here to be like more defensively cognizant, how do you think that also plays into his game? Because historically he's just kind of been that, not that he hasn't been defensively cognizant necessarily, but he's just kind of been a high output guy, which has always aided him on the feet. Whereas if he's trying to be more defensive, maybe more movement based, does that stunt his volume? Then in turn, it's harder for him to win minutes. Because based on even how he fought the first time, it was, 3-1 one side, 3-1 the other side, 2-2. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think he kind of has to try to be a bit more defensively cognizant, right? Like I said, I think Usman's power is maybe getting a bit overrated now, but also, there were moments in that first fight where he took a lot of shots in the jaw that he just didn't need to take. I think trying to play an outfighting game isn't the worst idea in the world. I mean, look, the bottom line is, it's funny because Usman obviously knocked Masvidal's fucking skull off in their last fight, but he got doubled up on strikes at distance in that fight. It's not like, for all of the improvements Usman's made, it's not like Usman went out there and just easily out kickbox Masvidal. He was losing the kickboxing pretty clean before the knockout in that fight. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's the worst idea ever. Like, I kind of think, and if Usman has gotten obsessed with his striking, it is possible that Colby could just outpoint him if he just stays out of his way. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. To be honest, that's what I was asking you. I don't have a great gauge on it. I'm really.
It's kind of amazing that this fight went 24 minutes the first time, and neither of us really have any kind of strong read on it the second time around, despite all of that data. But yeah, guys, thanks for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. Drop a like and subscribe, please. It would really help us out. And yeah, this week was kind of a weird week because I was away for work and Luke couldn't make it last night. Next week, we'll be back to regular scheduled programming Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. Club and Sub Podcast. Good luck on your bets this weekend, guys. Yeah, go Frankie Edgar. It will make you some money if you bet on him. But thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you next week. Take it easy.